In the small and quiet village of Belmonte, surrounded by thick forests and gentle hills, life moved slowly. People lived simple lives, helping one another, raising families, and attending the little church that sat on the edge of the woods. The church was old, built with stone walls and wooden pews that creaked under weight. It was a peaceful place where everyone felt safe. The church was run by four kind nuns: Sister Mary, Sister Agnes, Sister Rose, and Sister Clara. The people in the village loved them deeply. They taught the children, helped the sick, fed the poor, and sang songs that filled the village with peace and hope. They lived in a small stone house next to the church and were always seen together, walking through the village in their black habits, smiling and greeting everyone. Then one summer morning in 1980, something strange happened that would haunt the village for years. The sun rose, birds sang, and the villagers walked to the church for morning prayer, just like they always did. But this time, the church was quiet. The door was slightly open, and no one stood at the altar. No singing came from the chapel. No sound at all. One of the villagers, an old woman named Marta, stepped inside and looked around. The place was empty. She went to knock on the nun's house door, but no one answered. Concern spread quickly, and by noon the village was searching the area. They looked in the nearby woods, in the river, and even in the old well behind the chapel. But there was no sign of the nuns. Not one footprint. Not one clue. It was as if the four women had simply vanished into the air. The local police were called, but even they found nothing. There was no sign of struggle. The beds in the nuns' home were neatly made. The breakfast table had 4 empty bowls, still slightly warm. Their clothes were still there, their shoes still by the door. The only things missing were the 4 nuns themselves. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered that they had run away. Others thought they were taken. A few feared something worse. But no one ever found the answer. Days turned to weeks, and weeks into months. The search ended and the village mourned. The church stayed open, but it never felt the same. No one ever moved into the nun's house again. It stood there untouched, with dust gathering slowly year by year. As time passed, the story of the missing nuns became a mystery told to curious children and visitors who came through. People would point at the church and say, "That's where the 4 nuns disappeared, and no one knows why." But eventually, even that quieted down. The world moved on. Then, 28 years later, something happened that brought the mystery back to life. Father Thomas, the village priest who was just a young boy when the nuns disappeared, had now taken charge of the church. He loved the old chapel and spent time fixing it up. One rainy afternoon, while going to the storage room at the back of the chapel, he found an old wooden trapdoor beneath a dusty rug. He had never seen it before. Curious, he grabbed a lantern, opened the creaky door, and climbed down the stairs into the darkness. What he found under the church would shake the village and uncover a truth that no one had ever imagined. Father Thomas slowly stepped down the narrow, stone steps beneath the trapdoor. The air was thick and cold, and the only sound was the soft crackle of his lantern. The staircase twisted deep under the chapel, farther than he expected. When he finally reached the bottom, he found himself in a small underground room. The walls were made of stone, and the floor was covered in dust. There were cobwebs in every corner, and the air smelled old and forgotten. In the center of the room stood a wooden table with 4 chairs around it. On the table was an open Bible, its pages yellowed with age. Beside it lay a rosary and an old ceramic cup, still half full of water. Father Thomas's heart pounded. It was clear no one had been here in many years. Yet everything was exactly as if someone had just left it. He looked around the room, shining his lantern toward the far wall. That was when he noticed something strange. One section of the stone wall looked newer, like it had been rebuilt. The bricks didn't match the rest. He stepped closer and touched the wall. It sounded hollow. Carefully, he pressed against it and found a small opening behind a loose brick. Reaching in, his fingers brushed against paper. He pulled out a rolled-up note, old and brittle. He unfolded it gently, and his eyes scanned the faded handwriting. It was a letter. The words were shaky but clear. It was signed by Sister Mary. In the letter, she wrote of strange noises they had been hearing under the church in the weeks before their disappearance. She said they had started noticing shadows in the woods and odd sounds at night. At first, they thought it was animals, but then one night, they saw a figure standing outside their window, tall, still, and watching. They told the village priest at the time, Father Alvaro, but he dismissed it, saying it was just their imagination. The sisters prayed for safety, but the fear grew stronger. In her final words, Sister Mary wrote, "We believe something dark is here beneath the chapel. If we are gone, please do not forget us. We have gone below to seek the truth." The note ended there. Father Thomas stood frozen, the letter shaking in his hands. What did she mean, gone below? Was this room the last place they had been? He looked back at the wall and wondered if there was more behind it. He ran back up the stairs and returned minutes later with tools. Slowly, carefully, he began to chip away at the odd bricks. Dust flew, and stones clattered as he pulled them free one by one. After nearly an hour, he had opened a small doorway leading into another dark tunnel. It stretched ahead like a mouth into the earth. He took a deep breath, held up his lantern, and stepped through. The tunnel was long and narrow, the walls pressing in tightly. After several minutes of walking, he entered a wider space, a hidden chamber. What he saw made his heart stop. There, in the dim lantern light, were 4 simple beds made of wood and straw. Beside each bed was a small wooden cross and personal items, books, candles, and hand-sewn cloths. Everything was covered in dust, but nothing had been touched in decades. On one of the beds lay a habit, neatly folded. Father Thomas fell to his knees. This had been a hidden shelter, a secret room. It was clear now. The nuns had not run away. They had come down here, perhaps to hide, or to investigate what they feared, and they never returned. He searched the chamber but found no bodies. Only silence. Only signs that someone had once lived here. It was like they had vanished from this room too. He whispered a prayer and closed his eyes, feeling a chill run down his spine. Something was not right. If they had come here to escape something, where had they gone next? And what had they found that made them never come back up? Father Thomas returned to the surface, his mind racing. He knew he had to tell the village. The mystery of the missing nuns was far from over. Something still lay beneath the chapel, something no one had yet seen. Word spread quickly through the village. For the first time in nearly 30 years, people gathered around the chapel, not just to pray, but to talk about the discovery. Some villagers wept as Father Thomas read Sister Mary's letter aloud. Others stood in silence, unable to believe that the nuns had gone underground willingly. But as much as the letter gave a small piece of the puzzle, it also raised more questions. Why had the nuns chosen to go into the dark beneath the chapel? What had they feared? And most importantly, where had they gone after that chamber? Father Thomas knew that they had not simply lived in that hidden room and died. There were no remains, no signs of sickness or injury. It was as if they had left again, deeper into the tunnels. The idea disturbed him, but he couldn't stop now. The truth was close. That night, he returned with better tools, extra lanterns, and 2 trusted villagers, Mateo and Luca, who were both strong and brave. Together, the 3 men climbed down into the secret passage, through the underground room, and into the chamber with the beds. They examined the walls carefully and found something strange in the far corner. Scratches. Thin lines in the stone wall, forming shapes like arrows pointing downward. Beneath them was a stone that looked different from the rest. Father Thomas pushed on it, and with a deep grating sound, the stone shifted, revealing another hidden passage. Cold air rushed out like a breath from the deep earth. They looked at each other, then stepped inside. The new tunnel was narrower and darker. It felt older, as if it had been carved a long time ago. Strange markings lined the walls, symbols none of them recognized. The further they went, the colder it became. Their lanterns flickered as if the very air didn't want them there. After some time, they reached a large stone door, shut tight with rusty metal latch. They hesitated. Father Thomas whispered prayer, then slowly lifted the latch. The door creaked open, revealing a wide stone hall filled with darkness and dust. In the center of the room stood a round table, and around it were 4 stone chairs. It looked like a place of gathering, but not for any ordinary meeting. On the table were more symbols, drawn in a red-brown color that looked disturbingly like dried blood. On the far wall was a large cross, but it was turned upside down. The three men stood frozen. Father Thomas felt his stomach turn. Whatever this place was, it was not built by the church. He could feel it. This was older, darker, something hidden for a reason. They searched the room and found a small journal tucked in a crack in the wall. It belonged to Sister Agnes. Her handwriting was shaky, and the words were strange. She wrote about dreams, visions of a shadowy figure calling her name. She wrote of hearing voices in the night that echoed through the chapel. And then she wrote something that chilled them all. We have seen it. It is not a man. It waits beneath the earth. It knows our names. They stood in silence after reading those words. Lucas stepped toward the far end of the room where the shadows were thickest. As he moved closer, the lantern in his hand began to dim. Then suddenly he stopped. "There's something here," he whispered. Father Thomas joined him and gasped. In the wall was a narrow, deep crack. Inside the crack were faint, bony fingers. For hands, clutching inside the stone, frozen in place. The nuns had made it this far, but they had never come back out. They did not scream. They did not run. Instead, the three men stood still, each one knowing that they were standing in the middle of something much older, much darker than anyone had imagined. They knew they had to seal the tunnel again. But even as they climbed back up into the light, Father Thomas felt the presence behind him, still watching from the shadows. He looked back one last time and saw nothing, but in his heart, he knew something had never left that place, and it was still waiting. The village changed after that night. The chapel, once a place of peace and comfort, now carried a heavy silence. Father Thomas ordered the tunnels sealed with stone and cement. He held a special mass to honor the memory of the four nuns and to bless the church once again. But even as the villagers gathered and prayed, many felt uneasy. Some claimed the church bell rang by itself late at night, though no one was there. A few said they saw shadows moving near the forest behind the chapel. Others began to avoid the area altogether. But Father Thomas remained. He believed it was his duty to stay, to protect the village, and to guard whatever secret still lay beneath the ground. The journal of Sister Agnes was kept locked in a safe place, but the story it told never left Father Thomas's mind. The idea that something had lived below the chapel, something not human, was impossible to ignore. What had it been? Why had it called the nuns? Had they been tricked, drawn into the dark by a voice that only they could hear? Or had they gone willingly, trying to fight it with prayer and faith? No one would ever truly know. The fingers in the wall, those silent remains, were the only proof that the nuns had made it deep into the earth and never escaped. But there were no full bodies, no signs of how they had died. It was as if the very stone had swallowed them. Years passed, and slowly the village returned to normal. The church was repainted, the pews fixed, the garden replanted. New children were born, and most people no longer spoke of the four missing nuns. But a few still remembered. An old woman named Marta, the same one who had first found the chapel empty in 1980, would often sit outside the church on a small wooden bench. She would hum the songs the nuns once sang and stare at the windows of the chapel. One day, a tourist came by and took a picture of the chapel and Marta sitting in front of it. Later, when he looked at the photo on his phone, he noticed something odd. In the upper left corner of the picture, in the window of the old stone building behind the nuns' former home, there was a faint figure, tall, thin, and watching. The man circled it in red and showed it to the villagers. They were shocked. The shadow was shaped like a person, but the face was blurry, dark. No one could explain it. The photo was shown to Father Thomas, and he sat quietly as he studied it. He said nothing, only folded his hands and whispered a quiet prayer. That night, he went into the chapel alone. He stood before the altar, lit a candle, and placed the old rosary from a hidden room on the wooden table. "If you are still here," he said softly, "you are not forgotten." The flame flickered. For just a moment, the air turned cold, but then it passed, and the candle burned steady again. From that day forward, Father Thomas left the chapel door unlocked. He placed 4 small white flowers on the front bench each morning, one for each nun. He said it was a promise that their memory would remain. And though the trapdoor had been sealed with stone, he sometimes thought he still heard faint singing coming from the floor below, like gentle voices echoing from deep within the earth. No one ever reopened the tunnels. No one ever went back down. The chapel stood quietly at the forest's edge, its secrets hidden in stone and silence. The 4 nuns had vanished, but their story lived on, in whispers and prayers and in the shadow in a window that no one could explain. Some believed the dark force beneath the church had finally gone. Others believed it was still waiting. But all agreed on one thing. The village of Belmonte would never forget the day the nuns disappeared and what was discovered 28 years later.